Thank you very much for joining our webinar. Today, we will discuss how digital labor platforms are transforming the world of work. My name is Lieve Verboven. I'm the director of the International Labour Organization's Office for the European Union and the Benelux countries, and I will be the moderator. The webinar comes very timely. The ILO just issued a major study, and yesterday it was the launch by the European Commission of the first stage of the consultations of European social partners on how to improve working conditions for platform workers. It also comes just after legal rulings in the UK, the Netherlands and Spain on the recognitions of drivers and riders as workers with rights to statutory minimum wages, paid holidays, social security contributions, and other benefits. And we've seen it all during the pandemic. Material to protect against the coronavirus and access to sick leave has come more to the surface. Whether you're delivering food or doing online translations for an online web-based platform, it came to the surface. We have a full program today, so let's get started. I would like to welcome Nicolas Schmit, EU Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. And I'd like to invite you, Mr. Schmit, to make opening remarks. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So I welcome all the participants to this webinar on a very important issue, and you have already set the context because there is the report on World Employment and Social Outlook published today, I think, and yesterday we launched the consultation on the platform. Well, we are in a time of major disruptions, and the pandemic in a way is also a disruption because it had very serious, and it still has very serious impacts on the labor markets. But we see that there are a lot of transformations going on in our economy due to technology. And I really want to pay tribute to a report which I like very much, which is the report of the Global Commission on the Future of Work, which was prepared for the celebration of the centennial of the ILO. And here I think the issues are very well described, and also the solution. Now, we are talking about the platforms, and this is a business model which has grown now thanks to technology precisely, and which is very particular because, as you say in the introduction of your report, you have a business model which doesn't require any major invest in capital assets, nor needs to hire employees. So this is something quite disruptive in the world of work and in our economy in general. Now, we know that platform work is increasing. It's still relatively marginal for the time being, but it's increasing, and it has got also a strong push from the pandemic because services have finally relied on the platforms because of the closure of different facilities. Now, I would say first that certainly platform work and platforms open new opportunities for jobs, but also opportunities precisely for providing services in a very timely and targeted way. Second, it is a global phenomenon. It's not limited to Europe. It's not limited to the US. It's something which goes much beyond. So it has really a global character, and therefore it's very important also that the ILO is really investing a lot of study, a lot of work on the evolution and the impact of platform in the north, but also in the more developing world. And I welcome also very much the exchange we have also on the technical basis with the ILO on this topic. And you have mentioned it. This topic is in the public debate everywhere. It's in California, where you have a very big debate even during the last election with a referendum. It's due to court rulings, and you mentioned the recent court ruling. So finding effective policy responses to this phenomenon as dynamic and diverse as platform work requires, we need first a sound evidence base. And here I also thank the ILO for giving us, especially also in this report, a lot of information, and also information from those who are directly in the platform work, from the workers on the platform. So I think this is something very important. The EU has started tackling the platform economy from several angles. We have the platform to business regulation, which promotes fairness and transparency for business users of online intermediation services. We have the General Data Protection Regulation, which also has to apply to platforms and which should protect platform workers. In the area of taxation, a proposal on reporting obligations for platforms for tax purposes within the EU was presented last year. And the EU has deployed efforts to ensure the human-centric approach, which is very much developed also in the Global Commission's report, to artificial intelligence, following our white paper on artificial intelligence and the consequences of algorithmic management. The Commission has also launched an initiative seeking to ensure that under certain circumstances, EU competition law does not stand in the way of collective bargaining, and I will say a word on that a bit later. So why having launched this initiative on working conditions? Well, I think we are now preparing the action plan on the social pillar, and one important principle of this action plan is to have fair working conditions for all workers, including also platform workers. And that's why this Commission already in its work program for 21, but also the Commission President's program has announced a legislative initiative on the working conditions of platform workers. Now, why should finally platform workers not get the normal social guarantees and protections on health, on unemployment, on accident insurance, and so on, which all the workers have? And I think this is a fundamental question. And I would say, certainly we accept all that. The flexibility is part of the business model of platforms. But can we pay the price for more flexibility in denying finally the normal guarantees all workers have, and which have been built up in our social model for more than 100 years? So that's the issue, and that's why we have opened this consultation. And this consultation is focused on different aspects. Now, the first one, which is the most, the best known and also the most debated, is the classification of employment status in platform work. So are they finally mostly self-employed, as many platforms say? Not all of them, which shows also that there might be, even among platforms, some differences of views, or are they finally employees, because there is a strong relationship of subordination between the platform and the worker. And I think this is the issue which is debated largely in the public, but it's also the object of all the court cases, because finally you mentioned the UK Supreme Court. That was the issue. And finally, the court decided that they, for one platform, they should be considered as employees. Well, we have a numerous court rulings. A majority, not an over so big majority, are going in that direction, but there are also court rulings going in another direction. And this shows that we are in a gray area, in a gray zone, and that well, you cannot build. That's at least my view. You cannot build a sustainable business model on some kind of a gray zone, depending all the time on what your the next court case will tell you. And therefore, I think we need some clarity. We need some objective criteria, and that's what we try to achieve. So the second aspect, which is very important, is the fair working conditions for all. That's about transparency. It's about working time. We have a working time directive. How does it fit with the new ways of working, flexible working arrangements? And then a very important issue, health and safety, which is has to apply to all workers. The third one is about social protection of people working through platforms. And here I would say we have the pillar of social rights. And the pillar of social rights says very clearly in its principle number 12, the self-employed have the right to adequate social protection. So this is a very clear statement. So there is no exception. There's everybody, independently from the status, has the right to adequate social protection. Algorithm impact, I have already mentioned, which manage the working relationship. This opens a new chapter because you do not rely, you are not anymore dependent on some human being. You are dependent on an algorithm. How is this algorithm programmed? Is there there could be some discriminatory elements there? Who controls the algorithm? These are issues which go deep also in this human-centric approach we should defend. Finally, there's the collective bargaining. Now, in principle, self-employed do not have the right to have collective agreements, but now we see that this changes. Now the Commission is working on changing its competition law to open the possibility for all workers, including the self-employed, on platforms to have collective agreements. Well, there might be some others like training, professional development, which not all platforms guarantee. Now, what will happen? Now we have submitted this consultation document to social partners. They have 6 weeks to react, to give us their comments. Well, they probably will not be identical. Employers see it differently from trade unions. Then there will be a second consultation where we already insist on certain important elements we consider to be tackled. And then we see if social partners, what would be their rights if they decide to negotiate between themselves and say, well, okay, we agree that there's a need for some legislative action. We agree to do that, or at least to try to do that through bilateral negotiation. Well, I want to be neutral. I do not give my feeling, but we will see. And then if this happens, perfect, then they have to deliver a result, which then could become a European directive. If this doesn't happen, then the Commission has to take its responsibility and start an EU Commission proposal, which then will be submitted to the Council. So that's for the presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner, and great to see how this initiative is part of the bigger policy, the bigger picture of the European Commission to provide for a social Europe, also connecting it to DG Competition's initiative and also open consultation on opening collective bargaining rights for self-employed. So greatly appreciated to see the full picture of that, and also to have the time frame ahead of us. So it's just the beginning, I understand, of a debate, of a consultation, of a dialogue. And you mentioned that evidence-based findings and facts help. So that is now where I would like to lead us all into looking at the new WESO report. And Commissioner, I understand you will stay with us, but at some point duty will call you. So thank you then for being with us, and we'll come back to you just before you need to go. I now am pleased to be joined by the two experts. Um, the first one is Uma Rani from the ILO headquarters. Uma is a senior economist and author of the ILO report, World Employment and Social Outlook, which focuses on the role of the digital labor platforms in transforming the world of work. And Irena Mandel from Eurofound. She's the head of unit at employment and has very much, a lot of expertise on labor platforms as well. So welcome to both of you, and thank you for being here today with us. I will discuss our topic in more detail with you, more in a format of an interview. After the discussion, we will have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers, and a selection of the questions that will be asked in the question and answers box by the participants will be addressed then. So to you, participants, I invite you to post your question in the Q&A as we go along. Okay, Uma, let me start with you. Why did the ILO choose to dedicate this year's edition of the World Employment and Social Outlook to the topic of digital labor platforms? Over to you.
Thanks, Live, for organizing this webinar, and good afternoon to you, to Commissioner Nicolas Schmit and other colleagues who are watching us. I would also like to take this opportunity to actually thank colleagues of mine from the ILO, Rishabh, Marianne, Alina, and Nora, and also Sean and Alberto, who are our academic partners who are part of this journey, along with me producing this report, and also other colleagues at the ILO who have been incredibly active in helping us produce this report. Now, coming to your question, digital labor platforms are increasingly becoming part of our everyday lives. And also they're increasingly shaping the future of work. And as Commissioner Schmidt said, it's also been part of the public debate. Now they're transforming the way we work and the way work processes are being organized. Now, this has an impact not only on the world of work, but also on society at large. Now, if you look at the platforms per se, they are very limited regulation governing how they operate. Now, this creates challenges for ensuring decent work for workers who are actually mediated by them. And this actually became very obvious during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. ILO had already done some work on digital labor platforms, largely focusing on microtask workers. And it became increasingly important for us to actually broaden our understanding and generate empirical evidence with regard to experiences of workers on digital labor platforms. And that was one of the major reasons why ILO decided to devote this edition of the WESO to platform.
Thank you, Uma. And obviously, digital labor platforms is a vast topic. So what do you cover in the report? Which topics are there?
Okay, now what the report tries to do is it tries to have a sort of a balance between trying to understand how platforms are transforming the organization of work in processes. And for this, what it does is it provides a very comprehensive overview of digital labor platforms by analyzing some of the key features and strategies of the platform business model. So for it, it gets into the terms of service agreements and analyzes. At the same time, it also tries to understand what the implications of these platforms are on workers and businesses. So, for this purpose, it draws on findings from surveys and interviews which the ILO conducted with some 12,000 workers and representatives of 85 businesses around the world. The report also takes a very broad approach to regulation. It does not really confine itself to legislations and court judgments, but tries to go beyond it and describes the different governance and other initiatives that have been taken by governments, platforms, and social partners. And it also touches upon other fields of law and policy like competition, taxation, artificial intelligence, which are very much relevant to ensuring decent working conditions for platform workers. And finally, what it does is it provides about 15 policy recommendations for improving the conditions of workers and for ensuring fair competition for businesses.
Okay, thanks for that overview, and we will definitely come back to those policy recommendations. But could you tell us first something more about the methodology that the ILO used to gather the data for the reports?
Okay,
Why is it groundbreaking, for example?
What it tried to do is to understand the business model. It tried looking at some of the 31 major platforms terms of service agreement. Now, these terms of service agreements are quite detailed. So what we do is we go and look into each of these aspects and try to analyze and try to understand what this business model looks like. So unless and until we try to crack the business model, it's very important to see what needs to be corrected to ensuring decent work for workers. Similarly, for understanding the implications on workers, what we tried doing is we conducted these 12,000 interviews with workers. And here, what we did was we decided to break down the digital labor platforms into two parts. One is the online web-based platforms, which can be further categorized into three categories: the micro task, the freelance, and competitive programming, which actually cater to completely different types of tasks. And then we also decided to focus on location-based platforms where workers are actually in a real physical location and undertaking tasks. And here we concentrated on taxi and delivery services. What is quite unique about this report is the fact that not only the fact that it covers about 12,000 workers across the globe, but it also makes an attempt to look at what's happening in the developing South. Because a lot of work, especially in the taxi and delivery sector, has been done in the global North. And there's not so much that had been done in global South. So this report actually makes that attempt. And it's one of the first systematic and comprehensive reviews of the implications of digital labor platforms on workers around the globe. So I think this is why it is, in a way, a groundbreaking report.
Okay, so a lot of people interviewed for this report and a very global view that you have there. So what do we know, or what did you notice about skill levels, age, and gender profiles of platform workers? Do these parameters differ when you compare location-based platform to online service platform, for example?
Okay, to give you a quick overview of what these kinds of findings look like. Now, one thing that we did find is that the majority of the platform workers are actually below the age of 35 years. And the other thing is they're very highly educated. And this was much more so in developing countries. For example, on online web-based platforms, over 70% of the workers actually have a university degree. Similarly, even if you look at taxi and delivery sectors, that's a location-based platforms. Now, these are sectors which are often considered to be very low skilled. You always think that they're not highly educated workers that are here. But our survey found that about 20% of these workers who actually use platforms, whether it be taxi or delivery, actually have a university degree. Now, the other thing that we do find, which is very similar to what you do find in the offline labor market, is that women do find work on digital labor platforms, but they only represent 1 in 4, 4 in 10 workers on online web-based platforms. And when it comes to location-based, it's even worse. It's only 1 in 10 workers who are actually engaged in it. But what was quite interesting to find is in many countries, we found that a lot of migrants were finding opportunities on the app-based delivery platforms and also sometimes in taxi platforms, like if you take the case of Lebanon. So that's clearly an opportunity that is there for different groups of people. Now, the other thing that was quite revealing was the fact that, as in the offline labor market, there's also a gender-based occupational segregation of tasks. And this was much more evident in freelance platforms where men tended to perform more professional services and women tended to perform more business services or sales and marketing. And women were much less involved in technology or data analytics, something that we do know from the offline labor market. And you see that there is a very clear replica there in the online labor market.
Thanks. And do you have an answer to the question then why people engage in platform work? Do the motivations also differ between sectors and parts of the world? What are your views on that and your findings?
Yes, actually, we do indeed find that the reasons to work on digital labor platforms vary across the different types of platforms, and they also do vary by gender, actually. Like, for example, if you take online freelance platforms, now preference or the need to work from home or job flexibility is the main motivation. While on microtask platforms, it might be because you want to complement pay from other income sources or because of job flexibility. In contrast, on competitive programming platforms, it's quite interesting to see that many workers actually join these platforms either to improve the skills or to improve their career opportunities. Because if you have a very good ranking on these platforms, then the opportunity to get an offline job because of the rankings they have are very high. And we know a lot of workers who have said that, they've been able to progress towards that kind of a job. Now, the preference or the need to work from home or job flexibility, we also found that this was very important for women in both the developed and developing countries. And some workers in the developing countries also responded that the lack of employment opportunities and better pay compared to other variables were actually the most motivating factor. Now, on location-based platform, what's interesting is similar to that what you observe in developing countries, that is lack of employment opportunities, better pay compared to other available jobs, and job flexibility. I think one point that comes out very clearly looking from the study of ours is that while one needs to talk about regulating platform business model and trying to improve the conditions of the workers, I think there's a fundamental problem that we also need to handle, and that is relating to creating employment generating activities in these countries, which requires a very clear employment policy. And I think we cannot ignore that while we try setting this path right, because platform business models are actually using this gap and coming in and trying to establish these norms and exploiting the workers who are actually quite desperate to do any kind of a job. And I think this is very important for us to keep in mind.
Okay. So you're touching about situations of exploitation. Let me jump to a very direct and concrete question. Have you found out what the average hourly wage of platform workers is in online web-based services? Can you tell more there?
Sure. And that's one of the things that the survey actually goes about trying to capture. So if you're just interested in the online web-based platforms, what we found that the average hourly earnings in a typical week was about 3.4 US dollars. And what we found was that about half of these workers on these platforms actually earn less than $2.1 per hour. Now, if you try, this is the global average that we are actually talking about. We also found that there were important differences between the types of platforms and also between workers in developed and developing countries. Like if you take the case of freelance platforms, there we found that the average earnings was about $7.6. And these are professionals, remember that. These are highly educated professionals earning $7.6 per hour. While on microtask, it's less than half. It's only about $3.3 per hour. Now, on the freelance platforms, if you try comparing workers who reside in developing and developed countries and try to see how much they earn, you find that developing country workers actually earn only 60% of those in developed countries, controlling for all basic characteristics. Now, we also found that there were certain gender pay gaps. While we find that on average, women earn less than men, actually, the statistical analysis shows there are mixed evidences depending again upon the platform and also upon the country where we have done the survey.
Okay, that's very sharp, Uma, and astonishing numbers indeed. I am conscious of the time and looking at the commissioner. We would maybe need to leave the webinar soon. Commissioner, you want to come in, make some comments maybe on what's said by Uma on the latest on this very low wage that is earned on average globally. I know you have other initiatives launched as well on minimum wage, for example. But I let you take the floor if you wish and to give your comments or your takeaway. Commissioner, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I want to thank Uma for her presentation and explanations also. I think this is really a very, very rich report, which shows the different aspects, the negative ones and also the positive ones of platform work. And what is important, I think, is that platform work will stay with us. It will develop, it will increase. And therefore, there is a need. If we leave this just to the market, if I may say so, well, it will not go into the sense of more balanced approaches. And I see especially also in relation to wages, when we hear these wages, even for the qualified people, $7.6, that's the present minimum wage in the US. And we all know that the present administration wants to double this minimum wage. And this would not apply normally and automatically to platform works unless we establish some kind of new frameworks, rules, which apply also to platforms. So I think this is a very important aspect for the future of the world of work. Yeah. Either we have one more or less world of work with rules, with regulations, with protections, and we have a growing world of work with more or less no protection and with a very harsh competition. And where finally the power balance is not a balance, it's absolutely an imbalance. And this is not normal. I think we cannot just go backwards somewhere into the 19th century before or at the beginning of the industrial age, where these imbalances were part of the industrial model. That's not a way to go. And therefore, we have to look how this can be framed. I accept that certainly flexibility is an important aspect, but we cannot just have only one objective, and that's flexibility. We have to here also to make the balance. And my last word is, if this didn't happen, if we leave this platform work just by itself, what will happen then is that a lot of normal, so-called normal businesses will try to outsource more and more parts of their activities on platforms. Because if platforms are the regulation-free or more or less regulation-free area, with much lower costs, especially social costs, well, then also in the overall competition, traditional businesses will choose to platformization or will choose a kind of platformization. And that would dilute totally our social network, our welfare system. And this is what we really do not want for our societies at large. And therefore we have to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for being with us today, listening in, and we look forward to continue this debate. Thank you very much. I now turn to Irene. What are for Irene from Eurofound? Irene, what is your view on the opportunities and the challenges on platform work? What are your findings, and more than geared towards the EU member states?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks to the ILO for the invitation to join this webinar, and congratulations also from my side for a very interesting and rich report. On your question, what the opportunities and risks related to platform work are, I think an important point is that we should not consider that there is one platform work. We need to differentiate more, as also already hinted to by Uma, and have a more nuanced discussions on that. So to give you just a few examples as regards opportunities here for these types of platform works that are related to small tasks, low-skill tasks, there a big advantage is that it provides an easy access to the labor market and to income generation for the people. While if you're looking more at bigger tasks which require higher skills, and notably those where the platforms are really just doing a matching function, bringing supply and demand together and not intervening in the work organization, they can be a real impetus for self-employment, fostering entrepreneurial spirit, and also giving a real opportunity for getting working time flexibility to improve work-life balance. Similar, when you look at the challenges, those type of platform work that are related to small tasks, low-skilled ones, and where the platforms take a very strong role in not only matching, but rather managing the work progress, then this question about flexibility is rather limited. So the autonomy that the workers have, they are rather in a situation of subordination, of more control, so have less discretion there. And with this type of platform work also, that's the one where I think we should be most concerned about a potential misclassification of the employment status. And that influences a lot of rights and entitlements of the workers. And on the other hand, when you're looking at higher skilled tasks, notably, for example, the ones which are in the kind of the online sphere, like translations or design, programming, there you might have less of these issues regarding the potential misclassification. But a big topic, for example, could be the working time and the related earnings. So there you have a high potential of unpaid working time, of a potential race to the bottom, because you have a global competition for the individual tasks and elements related to that. One aspect that probably is a challenge for all types of platform work relates to kind of career opportunities within the platform economy. So they seem to be quite limited, irrespective of what kind of platform work we're talking about.
And have you seen that any of the challenges and opportunities are being impacted or have been changed by the pandemic?
Well, not really changed, but what you can see is an aggravation of the identified challenges already before the crisis. Again, to give you just two examples, maybe in the field of the taxi-like services, there we observed that they broke away because of the mobility restrictions and the governmental decrees that have been done. So there you face a group of workers who literally don't have access to work anymore, meaning also not access to income. And because of their status as being considered as self-employed, they do, for example, not have access to support schemes like short-time working, which very much cushioned a large part of the potential negative labor market effects of the crisis so far. And at the same time, there are also income support schemes for self-employment being enabled in many of the member states, but it is kind of questionable whether platform workers would have access to them because of the eligibility criteria for these type of instruments. And then on the other hand, you have platform workers like delivery riders, the ones who are bringing us our food and grocery. They actually face a different problem in the crisis. They do not really suffer from the demand. On the contrary, they have more rights to do. But that results then, or can result then, in a higher work intensity or unsocial working hours. And a big issue here certainly is then also the health and safety aspect, because it is not really clear who would be responsible to provide them with personal protection equipment. And considering that they are in direct contact both with the restaurants and the individuals getting the food, they could even be considered as essential workers, but they are far less protected than essential workers in the traditional economy would be.
And you mentioned a few of these challenges that we're facing and that aggravated in the EU member states. Do you have some good examples of EU member states that have addressed them?
Yeah, there's across the EU, there is actually a lot going on already in the meantime. So I think we are at a level where awareness about the challenges is quite high. And different type of actors are probably trying out what could be done to tackle them effectively. So there are a few examples of legislative attempts in the field of employment law, like for example in France or in Italy. Then it was already mentioned in that field, there is also ongoing quite a good number of court cases. They're trying to clarify the employment status of workers. But then there are also other actors, like for example, trade unions in quite a good number of countries trying to organize and mobilize workers to bring them a collective voice. And they have been successful as to this regard. There are also already some collective agreements emerging, either between a trade union and an individual platform, like we, for example, see in Denmark or in Norway. But then there's also another approach where there is a collective agreement at sector level, notably again the transport sector, like we see examples in Italy or in Austria, that are then more generic, so also covering the traditional economy, but making sure that explicitly also platform work is covered. And beyond that, we also see a good number of initiatives focusing more on specific elements like insurance or training or providing information and advice to the workers. So it's quite a variety of instruments already going on. But they, for the time being, all seem to be quite young and comparatively small. So time will tell us what is then really effective. So we will have to monitor and see what is happening there in the field.
And I believe, Irene, that Eurofound is monitoring this closely and that you've also built a repository around this. So for those that are curious to find out more about these specific examples, you can find them there. And I believe it's also posted in the chat box, so you can easily find the link. But let me now turn to Uma. These ways where member states of the ILO, other member states and in other parts in the world have addressed challenges. Can you pick on that? What can you tell us and the participants on this?
Okay, one of the biggest challenges that we do see in platform work, actually, as very rightly said, also in the chat box and also by Commissioner Schmit, has been the employment status of the workers, as they are often classified as self-employed or independent contractors. And they, as a result of it, they do not actually enjoy any of the rights or benefits related to it. So the issues related to working conditions, social protection, occupational safety and health, regularity of work and income, and also access to the fundamental rights, freedom of association and collective bargaining are actually affected. Now, Irene has mentioned some of the examples coming from Europe. taken by governments in Europe. But let me tell you a bit that's been happening across the globe. Now, what we do see based on the analysis that we have done in the report is that a number of countries have actually responded by extended social security. And this is much more so in Latin American countries, but also in some Asian countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, where there are specific contracts that are being done with platforms, or recently the Code on Social Security bill that has been passed in India. Then there are countries that have been actually looking at occupational safety and health coverage. And this is largely in the Asia Pacific region of Australia and New Zealand where you do find. And there's been this whole issue around classifying workers as employees rather than self-employed, or establishing a pricing mechanism and working time stipulations that we have seen in the case of taxi sector in India. Similarly, a number of countries have moved with data access and data protection, but this is actually in the making, so we can see. But one thing that I'd like to highlight, which was said in the concluding remarks of Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, is that I think we need a very clear, cohesive, consistent action that is needed. Though we have had a number of landmark judgments, especially in the last few weeks, but what's coming out is that there have been diverse court decisions that are coming out. And the regulatory responses is so diverse that it's very difficult to pin it down and say that, okay, we are solving the problem, because we are not. We are only solving the problem in a particular jurisdiction. And we should not forget the fact that these platforms actually operate across multiple jurisdictions. So one of the things that we do say in this report, and rather that's the call that we have, is that we need to have a very coherent, consistent, and coordinated international effort. And towards this, what we would like to do is there's a need to have an international policy dialogue and coordination to find common regulatory solutions, and to reinforce the fact that universal labor standards are applicable to all workers, irrespective of their employment status. And I think this is fundamental and very important.
And if you would say 5 key elements that in the current practice that need to change to immediately improve working conditions of platform workers, which one would those be?
I would rather say I have 6 very urgent ones that I'd like to actually highlight. I think
Shoot them off.
first one is something that we have all been talking about, is the employment status of the workers. And I think this has to be correctly classified and should be in accordance with the national classification system. The second relates to the whole issue of transparency and accountability of algorithms for workers. Whether it be ratings, whether it be allocation or evaluation of work, this has to be more transparent. As of now, we don't even know how we can actually access these algorithms. The third issue is the right to bargain collectively for self-employed workers. And for this, it is very important to move towards an harmonization of competition law and labor law. And the Commissioner has very rightly said that there is a move towards it. So I think we need to see how to take it much more globally and not restricted to Europe. The fourth thing that is fundamental is ensuring that all workers, including platform workers, have social security benefits. Now, this could be done quite easily, either through extension or adaptation of policy and legal frameworks wherever they are necessary. So this is the fourth one. The fifth one, which is again an important thing, and we have been seeing also as part of our work, and you see that on a regular basis in the debates, is workers should have access to courts of jurisdictions in which they are located, if they are able to choose. Because otherwise, as of now, it's become very difficult for workers, especially in developing countries, to actually take any of the cases to the courts, because most of these courts are in places where the platform belongs, which is a global north, and they cannot really have these fights. And the last one, which is fundamental for me in this quick 6 main elements, is platforms should stop charging commission fees or other fees to provide access to work. And I think this policy has to fundamentally change, and it's already in violation to the ILO's Private Employment Agency Convention number 181. And there are many more elements that are very important, and actually the report goes about touching all of them in much more detail in the report. You are muted.
Thank you. Before we turn to the question and answers, I have a last question to Irene. What are your views on those policy gaps? Any more ideas for them, more the European Union and the EU member states? Irene.
Well, first of all, I very much agree to what was mentioned by Uma. Maybe to add to this point about the regulatory clarity, in my opinion, this should not be limited to employment law and employment status, because in practice, platform work is much more complex. So we are also touching about data protection, intellectual property rights, consumer protection, competition law, taxation. So also there we should come to a more clear situation as regards platform work. And maybe to add two more points, I would feel that regulating or facilitating the portability of the ratings of the worker would be important, so that they are not kind of locked in on one platforms that they have started with, but that they have more possibility to really choose and transition between platforms, notably if they find some which fits them better, their personal situation, which then might also contribute to improving their working conditions. And related to that, also to give them a neutral and objective redress option if they feel that these ratings that they have received are not really fair, so that they are less dependent as to disregard on the platform. And as a last point, going somewhat beyond the discussion about work and employment, where something could be done is having a look at the status of notably a few very large, very dominant platforms, whether something could be done to break that up a little bit, for example, by supporting more younger local platforms to also enter the market, so that that becomes less of an oligopoly position, which then also might reduce the power imbalance that we see between the platforms and the workers.
Okay, thank you. So let me go on with the first question, because it links to what you have said in your 6 key elements, Uma and Irene. You've also touched on it, the employment status. And we have a concrete suggestion here in one of the questions. It's from Toren Albert, the policy director of EG Metal, who asks if settling the employment status would be solved by making a rebuttable presumption classifying platform workers as employees, unless a platform company could prove otherwise. And could it then immediately settle many of the other gaps that are there? Irene, would you like to come in on this one?
Sure, I can give it a start at least. In principle, I would support, but as I mentioned in the beginning, I think we should not aim for a one-size-fits-all approach, because we see these differences, and at the end, platform work is very much in a spectrum between the matching and the managing of the tasks, the work that is done. So my approach or my suggestion would be that these types of platform work that are more going into the direction of managing the task organization, the work organization, where the platforms are more dominant and more influential, that there is a higher likelihood that the worker would be rather an employee and not a self-employed. So there could be this reputable assumption, with giving both the platforms and the workers the opportunity to prove the difference if they wanted to, while there are other types of platform work which are really just doing the matching. They provide a platform that supply and demand can find each other and literally don't get involved in anything more. And for that, I would be a bit hesitant of imposing the employee status, because it might even be the worker who doesn't like it, because they're really working as a genuine self-employed and just use the platform as a strategic tool to find additional work or clients.
Okay, thanks, Uma.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I thought Torben's question was very, very important, and I had seen it in the chat box. I think I would, to respond immediately, I would say that, well, it solves part of the problem, but it does not really solve the full problem. Because let me start by saying that, yes, to say that all of these workers are employees, I think that's the road we do want to go around, and that's very important. But it will only solve to the extent that the workers might get all the benefits that are required. But it does not solve the problems of rating, the algorithms, the data protection, and all of the other issues that are actually associated with it. So I think that's first beginning for us to move ahead, but that alone is not enough. There are a number of other things that need to be done. Having said that, I also would like to make another point that where regulations are very good, where you have institutions, and I think if you're talking about Europe, this is very much so. There, classifying these workers as employees would help them in getting all the benefits. Where in countries where regulations are poor and where the institutions are weak, I think this is not going to resolve the issue at all, because a lot of these platforms might end up actually trying to get workers from those countries where these regulations are weak. And I think towards that, I think fundamentally we have to get down to saying that irrespective of the employment status, workers should be able to actually access all the universal labor standards that is there. So I think that's one point that I do want to put it on the table, because today we are not talking about a particular country, but we are talking about the global labor market, especially when it comes down to the online web-based platforms. And to the other question of to the issue that Irene has raised about mediating, I think I would be very careful there. And I would say that if, irrespective of what the platform is doing, even if it is matching and even if it is mediating, I think those workers should be classified as employees. Otherwise, there's too much of gray zone that one is going to create. If we start distinguishing different types of platforms, I would at least go down that road.
Okay, the debate is not closed on that one, it only opened. I have another question on the lack of reliable data sources. So for example, on official statistics or registers of platform, does the ILO report include some recommendation on the issue?
We do ask platforms to be transparent about the number of workers who are actually working on these platforms. Rather, this report does not go about giving an estimating or providing an estimate of the number of workers who are engaged on it, largely because of this reason that this data is not accessible publicly. What is accessible publicly is only the number of registered workers. And we did a small analysis of about 5 platforms. And what we found is that the number of actual users on these platforms vary between 0.1% to 27%. So it's the upkeep of the platform that determines, the number of workers that are there. So one thing that is very important is disclosure of information by the platform, so that it's very clear how many workers are we talking about and how to move ahead with regard to policy making.
The question continued to be, does the European Commission intend to address this issue? And there, unfortunately, the commissioner is not here anymore with us to answer that. But what can be said, though, is during that consultation process that it's now just started, this is one of the issues that social partners can bring along and influence that. I go to the other question in the Q&A, and I believe it's probably the last one, to both of you, Uma and Irene, on the impact of platform work, whether it's lower in countries with higher unemployment protection and lower rates of unemployment, such as the Nordic countries. So how is that impact there compared to countries where the labor demands and the unemployment protection is much higher? The countries mentioned here are Spain, Italy, and Greece. Irene, would you like to answer that one quickly?
Well, maybe that's also related to the point made before, as we do not really have strong and reliable data, notably with cross-country comparison. This is more as an anecdotal evidence, what I think we can answer than giving strong that. But what we observe in contrast to other digitally enabled labor forms, which we see to be more prominent in countries which are more techy, notably the Nordic ones in Europe, we do not see this trend with regard to platform work. So here we think it's a closer relationship to how healthy the labor market is. So in countries where workers have less traditional employment opportunities, we assume that there is a higher inclination to go to platform work compared to countries where the more traditional employment alternatives are there. And I think if it goes into this direction, this is something that we need to take into consideration as we are facing now an important labor market crisis. So there is some potential that at least some type of platform work really might decrease in the next couple of years, because other employment alternatives, they decrease and fall away.
Mm-hmm. And Uma, do you follow this this fear for that kind of development, or what are your views?
I think I would also sort of agree with Irene on that, saying that there's actually no systematic data that is there for us to observe. But based on the surveys that we have done, what we do find is that as of now, what is happening is, given the global pool of labor that is there, so, if there are jobs that are being outsourced, which are very cheap, you find that many in Europe or North America might not pick up any of the low wage jobs. And those tend to be picked up much more by the developing countries. But where there is a given wage is pretty good, then you find that there is an uptake that is there. But I think it's going to be only as we move forward that we will know how much, these institutional factors would have an impact in picking up many of these jobs. To an extent, one thing I'd like to highlight is that the lack of employment opportunities, I think that very clearly plays a big role with regard to the uptake of these jobs in different labor markets. That's very clearly a trend that we are seeing.
Well, thank you to both of you, Uma and Irena. We've now come to the end of our webinar. And if there are a couple of conclusions that are coming out of this conversation, then it is indeed that they point to the challenges ahead to address the working conditions of digital labor platforms in a coherent, a coordinated and a consistent effort. So I'm sure that this debate only started right now at EU level. We're happy that the reports that we produce within the ILO, but also within Eurofound, will be indicative, will be guiding the consultations and the road ahead. And that they provide the evidence-based information that is needed to have an informed debate. I thank you once again very much for being here with us, also to all participants, and I hope to see you at one of our next events. Thank you very much and take care.